Have you ever noticed that the most terrifying power isn't the one wearing a crown, but the one standing right behind you? Silent. They do not roar. They do not command. They do not even show their faces. Yet their eyes are everywhere, their ears are in every wall, and their hands can reach into the darkest corners of your home. You may think you are safe, hidden behind closed doors, whispering secrets with the ones you love, but you are not. In 15th century China, even if you closed your door and murmured a complaint about the emperor to your wife in a low voice, you would find a letter from the shadows on your windowsill the next day, a letter that needs no words, no threats. Its mere existence is a warning that you are being watched, that your every move is being recorded, that your life hangs by a thread. Today, we talk about the nightmare of the Ming dynasty, the Jinyiwei. The Ming dynasty rose from the ashes of the Yuan dynasty, forged by blood and rebellion. Its founding emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang, known as Emperor Hongwu, was a man shaped by suffering. He was born into poverty, orphaned at a young age, forced to beg for food and become a monk to survive. He fought his way from the lowest rungs of society to the dragon throne, and along that path, he learned a cruel lesson: trust is a luxury he could not afford. Every friend, every ally, every minister could be a potential traitor. Every smile could hide a knife, every compliment could be a plot. Paranoia gnawed at him, a constant. Cold fear that the power he had fought so hard to seize would be torn away from him in an instant. To protect his throne, to root out every possible threat, Zhu Yuanzhang needed a force that answered to no one but himself. A force that could move in the shadows, that could bypass the court, that could act without mercy or hesitation. He turned to a group of elite bodyguards, men handpicked for their loyalty, their skill, and their willingness to do whatever was necessary. These men were originally tasked with protecting the imperial palace, with guarding the emperor's life. But Zhu Yuanzhang had bigger plans for them. He transformed them into a secret police force, a network of spies and executioners that would become the most feared organization in the Ming dynasty. The Jinyiwei. The Jinyiwei were not just soldiers. They were the emperor's eyes and ears, his fists and his blade. To mark their status, to let the world know that they were above the law, Zhu Yuanzhang granted them two symbols of power, the Feiyu suit and the Shucheng knife. The Feiyu suit was a magnificent uniform, made of the finest silk, embroidered with flying fish patterns, mythical creatures that symbolized speed, agility, and invincibility. It was a garment that commanded respect, but more than that, it was a warning. Anyone who saw a man in a Feiyu suit knew that they were in the presence of someone who could arrest, torture, or execute them without answer to any court or official. The Shucheng knife was their weapon, a slender, sharp blade that glinted like moonlight. It was not just a sword, it was a symbol of imperial authority. The Jinyiwei carried it openly, a reminder that they acted in the emperor's name, that their actions were sanctioned by the highest power in the land. With these two symbols, the Jinyiwei became untouchable. They could enter any home, any palace, any government office, without a warrant. They could arrest anyone, from the lowest commoner to the highest minister, without trial. They could judge, punish, and execute, all in the name of the emperor. The law did not apply to them. The court could not restrain them. They were the embodiment of the emperor's paranoia, a force that struck fear into the hearts of every man, woman, and child in the Ming dynasty. What began as a tool to protect the emperor soon became a weapon of terror. The Jinyiwei's power grew unchecked, their methods grew more cruel, and their reach grew wider. They built a network of spies that spanned the entire empire, from the bustling streets of the capital Nanjing to the remote villages in the countryside. These spies posed as merchants, as beggars, as servants, ordinary people, invisible to the eye. They listened to conversations in tea-houses, in markets, in homes. They reported every whisper of discontent, every hint of rebellion, every word that could be interpreted as a threat to the emperor. No one was safe. No conversation was private. The empire became a cage, and the Jinyiwei were the guards. At the heart of this terror was the imperial prison, known as the Jiaoyu. It was a place of darkness. A dungeon hidden beneath the Jinyiwei's headquarters, where sunlight never reached and hope never survived. To be taken to the Jiaoyu was to be condemned to a fate worse than death. The prison was filled with countless torture devices, each more gruesome than the last. There was the Iron Maiden, a hollow metal statue lined with spikes that would impale anyone trapped inside. There was the Tiger Bench, a wooden bench where prisoners were tied down, their legs stretched until they broke. There was the Burning Iron, a red jian hot metal rod used to scorch flesh and bone. These were not tools of interrogation, they were tools of terror, designed to break the spirit, to extract confessions, true or false, and to send a message to anyone who dared to oppose the emperor. Stories of the Jiaoyu spread throughout the empire, stories of men who disappeared in the middle of the night, never to be seen again. One such story tells of a high Jian-ranking minister who made the mistake of criticizing a powerful eunuch in a private conversation. He returned home that night, kissed his wife and children goodnight, and fell asleep. When his wife woke up the next morning, he was gone. No note, no explanation, no trace. Days later, a friend of his received a message from the Jinyiwei. The minister had been accused of treason, interrogated in the Jiaoyu, and executed. His crime? A single sentence, spoken in the privacy of his own home. This was the reality of life under the Jinyiwei. A single word, a single glance, a single thought could cost you your life. The Jinyiwei did not care about innocence or guilt. They cared only about power, about obedience, about maintaining the emperor's control. They would torture innocent men until they confessed to crimes they never committed just to satisfy the emperor's paranoia. They would execute families for the crimes of a single member to set an example. They would destroy lives, ruin reputations, and spread fear, all in the name of protecting the throne. As the years passed, the terror grew. Government officials lived in constant fear, afraid to speak their minds, afraid to make a mistake, afraid that the next knock on their door would be the Jinyiwei. Common people stopped talking about politics, stopped complaining about hardships, stopped dreaming of a better life. They learned to keep their heads down, to stay silent, to pretend that everything was well. The empire fell into a state of collective anxiety, a world where fear was the only constant. But the Jinyiwei were not just monsters. They were also men, men who had sworn loyalty to the emperor, men who believed that their actions were necessary to protect the empire. They were trained to be ruthless, to show no mercy, but beneath their feiyu suits and their shuchun knives, they were human. And as the Ming dynasty began to decline, as rebellions erupted across the land and foreign invaders threatened the borders, the Jinyiwei would face their greatest test, a test that would reveal the true nature of their loyalty, a test that would turn them from villains into tragic heroes. By the end of the Ming dynasty, the empire was in shambles. Corruption was rampant. The economy was collapsing, and a powerful rebel army, led by Li Ziken, was marching toward the capital Beijing. The emperor, Chongzhen, was a man trapped by his own power, surrounded by officials who lied to him, by generals who failed him, by a people who had lost faith in him. As the rebel army approached, the court panicked. Ministers fled, generals surrendered, and the city of Beijing descended into chaos. Everyone was looking out for themselves. Everyone was trying to escape the coming disaster. Everyone except the Jinyiwei. When the rebel army broke through the city walls, when the streets of Beijing were filled with fire and blood, when the emperor climbed the Maishan Hill to hang himself, the Jinyiwei stood their ground. They were not soldiers of the court, not servants of the ministers. They were soldiers of the emperor, and they would fight to the death to defend his legacy. They donned their feiyu suits, drew their shuchun knives, and took their positions on the city walls. They fought against overwhelming odds, against a rebel army that outnumbered them 10-1. They fought with courage, with ferocity, with a loyalty that bordered on madness. They knew they would not win, they knew they would die, but they did not retreat. They did not surrender. They fought until the last man fell, until the last drop of their blood was spilled on the walls of the capital they had sworn to protect. They were the emperor's tools, forged in paranoia and blood. They were the monsters who had terrorized the empire for centuries, who had destroyed countless lives, who had turned the Ming dynasty into a prison of fear. But in the end, they were also the empire's last defenders, the only ones who remained loyal when everyone else had abandoned ship. They were the shadow that had haunted the Ming dynasty, and in the end, they became its last 陪葬品. Their bodies lay on the city walls, their feiyu suits stained with blood, their shu-chun knives broken, but their loyalty unbroken. They had served the emperor until the very end, even when the emperor's own empire had crumbled around him. The story of the Jinyiwei is a story of power and paranoia, of terror and loyalty, of light and shadow. It is a story about what happens when a ruler lets fear consume him, when he uses terror to maintain control, when he creates a force so powerful that it cannot be contained. Emperor Hongwu created the Jinyiwei to protect his throne, to eliminate his enemies, to find the security he so desperately craved. But in doing so, he created a monster that would terrorize his empire for centuries, a monster that would eventually contribute to its downfall. When a ruler tries to gain security by monitoring everyone, he has actually lost the empire. Power needs light, and it also needs shadow. Light is the trust of the people, the prosperity of the nation, the hope of the future. Shadow is the force that protects that light, that roots out threats, that maintains order. But when the shadow grows too large, when it twins the light, when fear replaces trust, when terror replaces hope, the empire is doomed. The Jinyiwei were the shadow of the Ming dynasty. At first, they were a necessary evil, a tool to protect the light, but over time they grew too powerful, too cruel, too hungry for power. They consumed the light, and with it, the empire. The Ming dynasty fell not because of rebellion, not because of foreign invasion, not because of corruption alone. It fell because its rulers had forgotten the balance between light and shadow. They had let paranoia cloud their judgment, had let fear guide their actions, had let the shadow of the Jinyiwei consume the light of their empire. The Jinyiwei were a warning that power without restraint is a curse, that fear without hope is a death sentence, that an empire built on terror cannot stand. Today, the Jinyiwei are nothing but a memory, a dark chapter in China's history. But their legacy lives on. They remind us of the danger of paranoia, of the cost of control, of the importance of balance between power and justice. They remind us that the most terrifying power is not the one that roars, but the one that stands in the shadows, silent and watching. They remind us that even the most feared monsters can be tragic heroes, that loyalty can be both noble and destructive, that the line between good and evil is often blurred. The Imperial Shadows are full of stories like this, stories of power and betrayal, of terror and loyalty, of light and shadow, stories that have been hidden for centuries, stories that reveal the darkest truths of history. The Jinyiwei are just one of those stories. A story of a force that began as a tool of protection and became a weapon of terror. A story of men who were both monsters and heroes. A story of an empire that fell because it let the shadow consume the light. If you want to feel this chill that has spanned 500 years, if you want to uncover the darkest truths of history, if you want to explore the shadows that have shaped empires, subscribe to Imperial Shadows. We do not tell the stories of kings and queens, of glory and triumph. We tell the stories of the shadows, the stories that history has tried to forget, the stories that reveal the true cost of power. We tell the stories of the Jinyiwei, of Wu Zetian, of Han Feizi, and of all the other figures who have lurked in the shadows of history, shaping the world we live in today. The Jinyiwei may be gone, but their shadow still lingers. It is a shadow that reminds us of the danger of paranoia, of the cost of control, of the importance of balance. It is a shadow that invites us to look beyond the glory of empires, to see the blood and the fear that lie beneath. It is a shadow that challenges us to question the nature of power, to ask ourselves what we would do to protect what we love, what we would sacrifice for control, what line we would never cross. The story of the Jinyiwei is not just a story from the past. It is a story about human nature, about power, about fear. It is a story that teaches us that even the most terrifying forces can have a tragic end, that loyalty can be both a virtue and a curse, that the shadow can never truly replace the light. And it is a story that will continue to haunt us, to fascinate us, to remind us that the darkest truths of history are often the most important ones. So subscribe to Imperial Shadows. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of history, as we uncover the secrets that have been hidden for centuries, as we explore the shadows that have shaped empires and changed the course of history. We only tell the truth that lies in the shadows, the truth that history has tried to forget. This is Imperial Shadows, where we bring the dark past to light.